Welcome to Train Freediving. In this video, I'm going to tell you about something that's going to seem too good to be true. But it is. So what I want to teach you in this video is how to make your training tables feel easier and be more effective. Now, when I say this, I'm not playing with my words. I'm not saying that maybe training easier is more effective. Now, that could be the case for many people. But in this case, I literally mean feel easier and still produce more CO2 or more hypoxia. Physiologically, the training will be more demanding, and yet it's going to feel less demanding. That's what I want to teach you how to do, and I'm going to explain how and why you'd want to do this. Now right away, the question is going to be, well, how is this even possible? What's the trick? So the way you're going to do this, the way you're going to make your tables feel easier and still be physiologically more demanding, is by counting recovery breaths instead of recovery time. So no matter which type of table you're doing, whether it's a static, dynamic, or apnea walking table, whether it's a CO2 table done on full lungs or a hypoxia table done on empty lungs, whether the recovery is getting shorter as the table goes on, longer, or staying the same, it doesn't matter. What I'm suggesting is that you should count your recovery based on the number of breaths that you're taking, not on the time spent breathing. If you do this, it will be possible to accumulate more CO2, accumulate more hypoxia, and still feel better doing it. If I was to put that on a table, it would look something like this. As you can see here on the table, if we do our training based on time in red, we have relatively low CO2, relatively high O2, and relatively high urge to breathe. But if we can do it with number of breaths in blue, we'll have relatively high CO2, relatively low O2, and then a relatively low urge to breathe. So physiologically, the blue training, or counting breaths, is more demanding, with more hypercapnia, more hypoxia, and yet it still feels easier. The urge to breathe is going to be lower. So at this point, I think the first question to answer would be, well, why is counting breaths allowing us to get more hypercapnia and more hypoxia compared to time? So physiologically, if we look at something like hyperventilation, we know that hyperventilating occurs when you breathe more than you need to maintain a certain level of CO2. It doesn't matter if you breathe for 1 minute, 15 minutes, or 5 hours. If you're breathing at the right rate, your CO2 isn't going to drop. Hyperventilation happens if you breathe more, so more volume of air, more total liters of air, in any given period of time. So, for example, if to maintain your CO2, you need to take 2 full breaths in 30 seconds, but instead you take 10 full breaths in 30 seconds, this is what causes hyperventilation. So physiologically, we know that gas exchange, CO2 out and O2 in, happens according to the amount of air that we're breathing over a given period of time, not how long we're breathing for. So if we put that to an example, let's say we're doing a 25-meter dynamic table. If you were to breathe 5 times between laps, you'll get a certain amount of CO2 and a certain amount of O2 between each lap. But if you were to do a 15-second recovery and breathe 10 times in that 15 seconds, then you're getting 10 breaths or twice as much O2 in and CO2 out. Now, that being said, it doesn't matter whether we take those 5 breaths in 10 seconds, 20 seconds, or 30 seconds. It's still 5 breaths worth of CO2 in and out versus taking 10 breaths in 15 seconds. So, assuming that you're manipulating your breath rate, time doesn't matter. All that matters is the number of breaths. So, right away, if we count breaths, we can more accurately control exactly how much CO2 we have at the end of our table, how much hypoxia we have at the end of our table, how much gas exchange is happening between each lap. Now, if we look at the psychological side of things, Now we can understand why it's possible to have more CO2 and less urge to breathe if we're counting breaths versus using time. So urge to breathe and contractions are only partly related to CO2 level. Of course, there's a certain limit. At a certain point of CO2, there's nothing we can do about it. We're going to have an urge to breathe. But this urge to breathe point can shift up and down depending on our psychological state. Stress, anxiety, tension, panic, nervousness, etc., will cause an urge to breathe earlier than if we're relaxed. So for a given CO2 level, if we're relaxed, we won't have an urge to breathe. If we're stressed, we will have an urge to breathe. Now this is where time versus counting breaths really comes in handy. If you're using time and you surface, and then right away your buddy yells in your face, 15 seconds, 10 seconds, 5, 4, and then you have to take your breath and you have to rush and you have to go. This need to rush according to the time causes anxiety, causes stress, causes tension, can even cause panic as the table progresses and as it's getting harder and harder. As you're accumulating more CO2, it's going to feel like 15 seconds is going to feel like 5 seconds. It's going to feel very stressful. On the other hand, if you're counting breaths, you are in complete control over your recovery, over your table. You can take a breath in, hold and release, and take as much time as you want to really control your heart rate, control your mind, stay calm, stay focused, stay relaxed, and just count the breaths. Doing this, you're going to feel more relaxed, your table is going to feel less stressful, and this is going to allow you to use, let's say, a lower total number of breaths per recovery than if you were rushing to go based on time. If you had only 15 seconds to take as many breaths as you want, naturally, like human nature, psychological nature, is to take as many breaths as possible in that 10 seconds or 15 seconds. If you know you can only take 5, then you're given the opportunity to take your time, rest, compose yourself, stay relaxed, and then continue your table. Now combining these two things together, the psychological elements of staying more relaxed, more in control, and more composed, and the physiological elements of knowing that number of breaths is what dictates how much CO2 or how much O2 we have in our body at any given time, not time breathing, then we can understand that it doesn't matter if we take a 30-second recovery with 5 breaths. This is going to be better training physiologically and easier training psychologically compared to taking 10 breaths in 15 seconds. So yeah, that's the trick, and that's how it works. In my opinion, obviously you're going to need some experimentation to decide, okay, what is the equivalent number of breaths according to the sensations that you're trying to get on your training table. Once you find that out for yourself, then training from then on is going to be very easy. You know how many breaths you take now. As you progress, you can either add laps or repetitions, or you can remove recovery breaths between laps. That's up to you as you progress, making your training stay appropriate to your level. In any case, I strongly suggest that you switch your training table recoveries from time to number of breaths in all cases. Unless it's really long recoveries, like 2 or 3 minutes, then that's too much. But if it's normal recoveries for CO2 or O2 tables, typically anything between like a 15 and 1 minute recovery, then switching to breaths is going to be, in my opinion, more effective, more comfortable, and more physiologically demanding, which is going to be like a positive feedback loop. The training will feel easier, you'll be able to train harder, then you're going to make faster adaptations, meaning that you're going to feel even better, meaning you can train even harder, and so on and so on and so on. It's not just me that's doing this. I've been experimenting with different athletes and coaching clients of mine that have been working on their own training currently right now, and I'm going to shout out to one of my distance coaching clients, Lewis. He's been working on number of breath recovery based exercises for about a month with me now, and just last week he said, I'm misquoting him a little bit, but he said that he was very surprised at how few breaths he was able to take and still not get contractions and still not get an urge to breathe, compared to what he was doing before when he was pushing himself like with time instead of recovery. So far I've been having success with it with myself and with my coaching clients. I believe that you can have success with it as well. Just make sure to use the recovery breaths appropriately. Use them to compose yourself. Use them to relax. Take your time with the breathing. And that is going to give you the psychological benefits of relaxation, which is going to allow you to use less recovery breaths and still be more comfortable than if you were taking 10 breaths as fast as you can in 15 seconds just so you can make it through your next lap. So all in all, give this a try. It might take some experimentation, but I believe that incorporating recovery breaths instead of time into your training is going to be beneficial in the long run. It's going to allow you to do easier feeling and more physiologically demanding training, which in my opinion is a big win-win. More adaptation for less perceived effort. And really, that's all we ever want in training. Easy training that actually works. So give it a go and let me know how it goes in the comments below.